This week on the Austin Healey channel, batteries, brakes, and bits and bobs. Before we get the car to move under its own power, we needed to be able to stop. So with it over the pit, I can now add the brake fluid and bleed the brakes and see if they work. Let's add some juice and see what happens. And now we start looking for leaks. You can actually watch some bubbles come up from inside the brake line. So I think I'm just going to let it sit for a while until all those bubbles come up. I have bled the brakes. I should give you an update on that. They're not very good. I got most of the air out, so there's some pressure. It's very spongy pedal, but I think I need an assistance foot to help me finish that off. I tried doing it with the hose in the bottle, and that helped some, but it wasn't enough. Also, I learned something very funny. So pushing the car around the shop, it didn't push very easy. And spinning the car with the wheels when they're jacked up on the rear brakes, they would kind of go 3/4 of a turn and then kind of engage the brakes and go slow and then release and do it again. I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. I had the adjustment turned all the way off. So what did I do? RTFM. RTFM is an acronym for read the effing manual. So I got the shop manual out, I'm reading about brakes, and the cylinder on the back that has the emergency brake in it has 2 nuts that hold it on, and they're nylocks, which is kind of funny. And so I put it in, tightened it up, and it was fine. Well, it turns out that those 2 nuts have to be tightened up and then loosened half to a full turn to allow this the cylinder to move up and down, and that allows the brake shoes to center themselves on the brake drum. Who would have guessed that loosening the screws? RTFM, man. So my brakes are working much better now. When I spin them and stomp on the pedal, they do stop, though I don't think I'll drive it very far with the brakes like this. I need an extra foot in the shop to help me with that. Also, while I was bleeding them, I had to take one of the cylinders all the way off because it wasn't bleeding. I was getting a fluid all the way up to the joint that goes on it, but I couldn't suck anything out. The fluid wasn't coming out even when I pressed the brake. So I pulled the cylinder off. Well, pulled the brake drum off, took the shoes off, unscrewed those nuts, took the cylinder and took it apart. And first there's a ball, there's a bleeder valve and then a ball, and I thought maybe the ball stuck. Well, that wasn't the case. But then there's a short hole that goes from the bottom of where that ball seats down into the cylinder, and it was full of junk. I don't know what else to call it. I guess when I cleaned out the cylinder, I didn't clean out the hole. So if you're doing that, take a piece of wire and fish it down in there and get any junk out of there. If it was loose, it would have just blown through and pushed the debris out, but it was pretty packed in there. So I learned some stuff about the brakes, so I'm pretty sure when I can move it forward, I can stop it when I need to. The emergency brake also works if they fail. So it's time to play with some batteries. If you remember, I bought these dry. They come dry, and you have to add your own acid. In some countries, that's difficult to get a hold of the acid. I guess they don't trust people with acid. In the country I live in, it was easy to get the battery acid. It was just in the by the motorcycle batteries. I guess they come dry as well. But because it's acid, we are going to take a lot of precautions. I have gloves and I got my safety goggles on. Acid's bad stuff if it gets on you. My dad had suggested using a turkey baster to transfer the acid over from the bottle into the battery. However, I live in a country that doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving. There are turkeys available, but it's not so easy to find a turkey baster. I do have a battery acid measuring device that was next to the battery acid at the shop. So I could use that, but it's more difficult. So what I'm just going to do is use a funnel and pour very, very carefully. We want to fill it up just to the top of the dividers. That's what the workshop manual suggests. If you fill it up higher, there's a chance that it will leak, and you don't want it leaking all over the place. I did test the battery acid, and on the battery acid tester it said it was good. So I don't need to dilute it with distilled water. So it goes straight in. Your battery acid may vary. Bad part is my safety goggles make it harder to see. I'm not exactly sure how much battery acid I'm going to need. I have 3 liters of it here. There now, it's just up to the level. We'll do the other chambers, and we'll have one done. So it looks like I used 2/3 of a liter, so we might have enough. One of the important things for me on this channel is to share my mistakes, because nothing ever goes perfectly, and I want you to learn from me, much as the way I learned from my father. My father was a professional mechanic, and one day there was an accident at work. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but there was a battery that blew up in his face. I was pretty young at that point, and I still remember it pretty vividly. That, you know, he came home with bandages wrapped around his eyes. So the battery blew up in his face, and his coworkers, you know, started pouring water on flushing his eyes out with water, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. And he went to the hospital, and he said the worst part, they started rinsing his eyes out with salt water, and it felt like they were using sand. Anyway, he had no long-term damage, but I'm still kind of scared of batteries. I still need to work with them, but the batteries, lead acid batteries, when they're it's a chemical reaction when they're charging and discharging, and it can release hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas, as you might know from the Hindenburg, is a little bit flammable. So be careful with what you're doing, and you know, don't let a battery blow up in your face. I won't be able to show you, but down in there it's bubbling away. I don't know if it's having a chemical reaction or just there were, you know, air pockets. So we're gonna let it sit for a while, and then check the level. I've used 3 liters so far, and it's not enough. It's gonna take like 3.5, I think. So I gotta go buy some more. So now the question is, how do you clean up all this stuff? You need a neutralizer. Water is less acidic, right? You dilute it. You dilute it enough, it becomes inert. So basically rinse it off with water is the best thing. You know, like they did with my dad's eyes. Other things I did, I put fluid in the differential. This is what I use for the differential. It's SAE 80-90. After putting gas in the car, put my charger on it to get the fuel pump to work, so I could test the fittings of the fuel system to make sure that they're not leaking, because it's plumbing after all, right? Yeah, it starts pumping gas all over. There was one connection down at where the hard line goes to the flexible line. It hadn't seated all the way, and it was just pouring all over. So it made a mess. And then I had to be very careful not to like make any sparks or anything until I got the shop aired out, because there was a lot of gas. I got that sorted out, and so the fuel system works. And since I have the original pump, it doesn't just keep pumping. When it reaches that pressure, it slows down and then stops, which is really nice to hear, because I haven't heard that since the Sprite had its original fuel pump. And there's something about that. I don't know, it feels like it knows what it's doing instead of just pump, 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 pump. I don't know, it feels sentient in a way. It's like, okay, I have enough fuel, I'm good.
If you want to come along on the ride as we complete this project, click the subscribe button. If you want YouTube to tell you every time there's a new video, click the alarm bell. Thanks for watching, and your support is very much appreciated.